Hey everyone, welcome to episode 8 of the Warrior Philosopher podcast. Now, this has been a long time coming. I'm finally joined by my good friend Austin Staudenraus. As you guys may know, he's edited a couple of our videos so far. He's been a bit slacking because he's been busy at work. Hasn't been able to upload as many edits as we'd like him to, but we have him today. It's a Thursday night, a very unusual time for us to do a podcast, but he happened to have some time today, so we decided to say, fuck it, and let's do it. Having a couple of, what do you call these?
These are Radlers by Stiegel. It's an Austrian Radler. It's 2.5% alcohol, but it's like
It tastes
soda.
like,
It's like grapefruit
tastes
flavored.
like soda.
There's lemon and there's raspberry, I think.
It's pretty good so far. Now, we just have a couple of things that we want to talk about. Wrote some notes. Obviously, with my podcast, we just kind of like free flow with ideas, but we have a few things that we want to bring up today. So if you see me fucking around with the mouse, I'm just trying to make sure my computer's staying on. But if you just, since this is your first time here, if you could just briefly introduce yourself, kind of talk about what you're about.
Okay, that's like a very broad spectrum.
Just how old are you?
Okay.
All that stuff.
Well, my name is Austin Staudenraus. I'm 23 years old. I'm from California, just like this guy over here. Slightly different areas.
Yeah. SoCal, NorCal. He's a SoCal boy.
I'm a SoCal
boy.
guy. Specifically Temecula area. Which now I don't really live too far away because I'm stationed in the local kind of area. So this is called the Warrior Warrior Philosopher podcast.
Yeah.
I want to say Warrior Philosophy, but that's what it is teaching.
Yeah.
I'm more of the warrior aspect. I love military history, so I do dabble in a little bit of philosophy, not as much as this guy here. So if we ever talk about history straight up in military battles, especially 20th century and 21st century, that'll be my cup of tea. But yeah, we're going to talk about philosophy and some political stuff today. So that's what I will attempt to speak on. I'm sure I'll be dwarfed by your knowledge.
No, you'll be fine. We have great conversations.
Yeah.
Now, I will say this. Yeah, one of the things I enjoy most is when we walk and talk and we kind of discuss things. And I enjoy that. I think like we have some good conversations, and it's great that we can finally actually get on a podcast and kind of explore further. I think when you have people listening in, you kind of you're forced to compartmentalize your ideas better and articulate them better, and then you really learn more yourself because you're almost like teaching. Like a podcast format is almost like teaching, so it's like you have to formulate your ideas in a way that other people are going to understand them. Therefore, you yourself are almost like relearning what you already know because you have to articulate that to the audience. Now, some of the things we're going to talk about today, we're going to be talking about human nature in regards to how humans will gravitate towards power. They will gravitate towards whatever empowers them, whether that be an individual person, a collective group, a popular movement, a social movement. And I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation. Obviously, now this has been something that I've been bringing up a lot recently. Masculinity, specifically in the Western world, the developed world, and how there's definitely been a crisis of masculinity.
Agreed.
And how just because you want to be masculine, there's a lot of people that are taking advantage of this masculinity crisis. Like, as you know, in my recent videos, I've been criticizing Andrew Tate. There's a right way and a wrong way to approach the crisis of masculinity. There's a way that truly empowers men, and then there's a way that certain individuals will take advantage of for their own gain. And we're going to be trying to actually, talk about how you can empower yourself and be a better man, not only for your own fulfillment, but for everyone around you and for the greater good of your community, and really trying to make a difference in the world, because that's what being a man is. Now, we also want to talk about fear, love, respect, and how that relate to power. As usual, as I have been recently, I'm going to talk a little bit about Nietzsche and Schopenhauer's Will to Life. We're going to talk about postmodernism and the effects it's had on, like I said, Western world, developed countries, because I do think that postmodernism has had a negative impact on masculinity, along with all their forms of identity. We're going to be talking about the need for suffering, the need for pain, and how overcoming suffering and pain are what will bring you true fulfillment and true mastery over life. And of course, It may not be Sigma Sunday, but we're going to definitely be talking about some literally me characters, Fight Club, all that stuff, and then reflect on death, which I think everyone should do. So, human nature is to gravitate towards power. Why do you think that is?
I think it's an evolutionary thing, regardless if... I guess we can get on this later when it comes to religion later in the hierarchy there. But I do think on a level it is evolutionary, whether it be macro, micro, because humans seek discipline and order because the world, nature is chaos.
Right.
There is nothing in nature that is organized. So the only thing that can think in an organized manner, I won't say animals can't think in an organized manner, but humans, do think that way. I think that is why we seek power or we seek leadership, is because we inevitably seek really just order.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that. So I'm sure you've seen, I forget what quote this is from, but there was like a Matthew McConaughey movie where he talks about how human evolution, once we were able to self-reflect and really be self-aware, that was the great flaw in human evolution. Because once we were able to think and be self-aware, then you start to question these natural instincts that most animals will have that will benefit them in survival, and then it starts to kind of muddle up. Once you start to think and you're able to have a perception to the things that you see, you start to take natural human drives and start to try to interpret them in different ways, and then you have you get into technological advancements, modernity, and you see the issue with how we have structured society and how it definitely goes against a lot of our evolutionary human drives, and how that can cause a lot of issues within civilization, as I think you would agree. The reason I mentioned that is you talked about order, right?
Yeah.
The evolutionary drive that gravitates humans towards power ultimately is about survival, right? If you find a powerful group or a person, that will help you survive.
The collective, which is always going to be controlled by a ruler, right? Whether that be a singular ruler or sub-rulers. Yes, to be a group is more evolutionary-wise a safer bet to survival. That's why the people who can bond together to make a stronger group, or the animals that can work in packs like wolves, are ultimately more dangerous than someone who does something alone.
Right. And you do have hierarchies in nature. You have the animal, you have like the lion, the pride of lions, right?
Yeah.
Like you said,
wolf
pack, or ant colony.
Yeah,
even, right?
Ant colony is a good one.
But that's all instinctual. So animals won't question that natural instinct. But as humans, since we are self-aware, it is our natural instinct, our natural urge to gravitate towards power, gravitate towards either a collective group or an individual who will help us survive. But then when we start questioning it, it becomes muddled, and some people start to manipulate this natural human instinct for their own benefit, for their own gain, which I'm sure we'll be able to get into quite a lot.
I think the key to power is knowing that you are never safe regardless of how much power you wield. Because at the end of the day, and I don't know if this happens in nature necessarily, but I'm going to use examples of Wolfpack, but we're going to just use Wolfpack as humans, right? Mm-hmm. The leader of that Wolfpack, at the end of the day, the whole pack can turn against him and eat him alive, right? Right. And that is power endowed in the leader to make the right decisions, but they must realize that they're always at stake of losing that power, and vice versa, that if the leader demands something, that the individual is also in danger of the pack.
Right.
It's a dynamic.
Because ultimately, your status and your power as a leader comes from the result of you being able to take care of your subordinates and be able to... I mean, if you're not doing a good job as a leader, you're going to be blamed for all the bad things.
Well, that's why we say that you should elect individuals by merit.
Mm-hmm.
Does that really happen? We won't really get in here today, but I mean, that's how it's supposed to be,
right,
by merit. Because it's supposed to be why, for example, in the U.S. we have impeachment, like the ability to impeach and stuff. Because if you lose the ability to lead the pack, then you should be taken out by the pack. Not
right,
killing in this case, but removed from that position of power.
Right, impeachment. Now it's funny that you mentioned that should, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of so when I talked about the natural animalistic instinct to gravitate towards power. So the strongest male lion, the strongest wolf, that's a natural thing, right? Nature is not misconstrued by perception. It is what it is. There's no way around it. If you're not a strong lion, you're gonna get taken out by a bigger, stronger lion. If you're not a strong wolf, you're not a smart wolf, another wolf will come along and take your place. But you say it should be this way. But the issue with humanity is because of our higher ability to think, we are able to sort of manipulate this natural process. So at times, individuals who shouldn't have power will have power because of advantages that they wouldn't naturally have in the state of nature, or like through cronyism, for example, right?
Yeah.
Certain individuals that have the right connections will be put in a position of governance, for example, without the proper faculties to govern well. So that's manipulating the natural state of things, natural selection, if you will.
Which I think in the long run does, I think, upset people.
Right.
That's why I think we're in a current state, at least in the Western world. When I say Western world, I mean Europe to U.S., but mostly focused on U.S., where we have this ever-dividing gap between, and I don't want to go too much into it, right and left in social aspects, because I think that both sides are realizing that there is something deep within that's like doesn't feel right, that this order of things doesn't feel right, and that the power they should have as a collective doesn't really matter anymore.
Right. And like you look at families that have been in the political realm for a great deal of time, right? You have this sort of like when you think of a dynasty, you think of the feudal system, right? Okay, we have families that are noble families that hold power. That's just naturally how it works. But this idea is still very present in what are supposed to be meritocratic systems, right? Like we're supposed to be a meritocracy in the United States and in other democracies throughout the world, but you still see generational political power passed on. You still see this idea that although it's supposed to be the individuals who are most capable of governance, for example, attaining governance, you start to see, you say, okay, this guy, his dad was a senator, and now he's a senator. This other individual's family has a long history of being the governor of this state or the mayor of this city. So you have this continuation, which is almost a reflection of the old dynastic system, generational power passed on, which isn't necessarily natural to how evolution would take place, right? Yeah. So it's
evolution is through. This could lead into our next point. Evolution is pain. Evolution is pain. It is suffering. It is killing. It is dying. It is all those things. And we have in the modern world circumvented those things. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but I do think there is a need for some of those things, and there's also a need for those things in the metaphorical realm.
Because something's lost from that natural competition that produces the best, most capable individuals.
Correct.
Right. So obviously there's good to that, right? In the state of nature, someone who's born without the use of their legs isn't going to be able to survive. But in the modern world, they could have one of the greatest minds, right? Yeah. And then they could contribute to human innovation.
I mean, that goes into evolution too. Is it's changed from survival of the fittest, meaning physical being, to survival of. Now it's more heavily weighed on the mind. What can someone produce? I think it's a mixture of both, but yes.
Right. And now going back to human gravitation towards power, I think that when we look at power in general, a lot of power is rooted in identity, right?
Yes.
So if you go back, power is rooted oftentimes in conquest. Right, you support the king who is able to exert his will upon other kingdoms. You support the sovereign who is able to safeguard the stability of the realm in which they are governing. It's merit based. It's through displaying your ability to be exceptional towards your constituents. Now, today you still have that element of humans worshiping the power of an individual, but I believe, especially in a postmodernist world. So, just for those of you that don't know, I've spoken briefly about postmodernism in my when I talked about my experience at Jordan Peterson's Beyond Order tour.
Yeah.
Now, postmodernism essentially is the philosophy behind it is the belief that societies should be structured in a way where you have a fracturing of identities, that no one identity becomes stronger than another, so that you don't result in, for example, if you look at many nationalist movements that were rooted in ethnic identity or national identity, obviously a lot of bad can come from that. But in a postmodernist world, to avoid that, they just don't want any identity at all, especially ethnic or cultural.
I would say that's just I feel like that's very well, you said nationalist. I'd say it's very Marxist in nature. The idea of no one has an identity, but there will always need to be an entity that is the leader. In this case, in Marxism, it's not that the individuals are partaking in the identity. It's just a group of people who are in charge of the identity for the people.
Right.
Right. And that's the way I think that things are going now.
Ideology is the identity.
Yeah, ideology is the identity. Correct.
Exactly. So why I wanted to piggybacking off of that, the way that people, so like I said, people gravitate towards power. What empowers them? Now, just like you said, in a postmodernist world where you have fractured identities, where culture and so if you go to the idea of the nation state, shared language, shared culture, that isn't the case in a country like America, for example.
No.
So people's identities are tied to their political beliefs oftentimes, which social movements they support.
Yes, I think in America we struggle more with a idea of a leader, just due to the fact that we are so diverse, which is our strength, but also it is an Achilles heel as well. We have so many ideas. That's why we have so many different people here, so many different beliefs that we are able to manufacture, or I want to say wrong word. We're able to produce some of the greatest technology that has ever come in the 20th century and 21st century, some of the greatest ideas. And we have such influence over the world just due to the fact that, because we can think outside the box. Problem is, we can't seem to think in the box. We can't seem to have a order and structure.
Like foundational.
We can't have foundational things that we can all come back to.
Right, and that's important.
Because if I said to you, "What is American?"
I couldn't give you a proper.
There
answer.
is no answer. But if I said, "What is French?" we could probably list a few things. If I said, "What is Russian?" We could probably list a few things. That kind of stuff.
Right, and that is due to a postmodernist world. And like I said, when you don't have this sort of classical identity within the nation state, or even if you go back further, even city-states had their identity, right? Now, what their identity was usually not based on was ideology alone. And that is essentially how American identity is today. That's why we have a fractured identity, because you have all these different social movements, all these different political ideologies. And that is how people sort of identify now, right?
Yes.
So it's no longer, are you an American? It's, are you a Democratic American or you're a Republican American? Do you support this social movement or that social movement?
Did you vote for this person or that person?
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
So it's no longer about American exceptionalism and about furthering the interest of the collective group, which is America, but now the collective group, which is a social movement or an ideology, which really fractures a country, because instead of having one cohesive unit, like you take World War II, it didn't matter if you were a Democrat or Republican, you were an American, you were fighting against the enemies of America.
Well, that's one thing that people will always point to, is that Americans seem to always come together when there is a war. And this goes in like military history a little bit. I would argue that has kind of ended post 9/11. Maybe my view is bleak, but I think World War II was a direct attack on a nation. But you went to war, and you went to war until the war was over. And the thing is, the people felt the plight of war. They were giving up cans. They were giving up pots and pans to manufacture weapons, vehicles. That's just one.
And everyone was a part of it.
Rationed. You had blackouts. At certain times. We live in an age in which America has not experienced that level of unity or forced unity, right? When we went to war in Afghanistan and Iraq, everyone back here could have absolutely nothing affected.
Right.
nothing affected. They didn't feel the war.
Mm-hmm.
And even the troops that went, rotations, 6 months or a year, depending on if you're a soldier, if you're a Marine or sailor or airman, right? And I'm not advocating for war to unite America, but I'm saying that usually that's when we come together. And historically, in the modern era, the 21st century, we have not seen that, even at technically our lowest point in the 21st century when we were attacked on 9/11.
Right.
Yeah.
And that still showed a lot of unity, but still not the level of unity that we had in the past. And I think that is as a result of fractured identities and identities rooted in belief systems and ideology as opposed to a sort of national identity. Because now even America has been unique in national identity compared to other countries. We've always been civic nationalists, right? There's no one ethnic group that makes up the United States. There's no one religion that makes up the United States, even though there may have been predominant ones at one time. It was civic nationalism, right? So it was already unique to Europe, for example, because America was named after an explorer named Amerigo, right?
Yeah,
so it's already sort of this artificial.
Amerigo Vespucci, right? I think is his name.
What's up?
I think it's Amerigo Vespucci is his full name, right? He's Italian, right?
He's Italian. I can't remember his full name.
I think that's
Amerigo.
I think that's it. Yeah, but Amerigo.
Yeah, but even our very name comes from an individual. It's very like, what are we, right? It's not an old name that can be rooted like you know what I mean? Like,
I think what's more important about America is not what are we, it's what do we stand for.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is that there's no one taking the helm to be like, this is what we stand for and this is what we identify as. You have multiple competing fractions, and I just think it's going to lead to a worse result because we can't unite. The ultimate goal should be unity, and then we can hash out the rest. But I also think civic nationalism revolved around the idea of, we have an American flag, and it means live and let live. You do your thing, I do my thing, but at the end of the day, you live across the way, and I respect you for being a fellow American. Mm-hmm. Like, you might practice Catholicism, I might practice Protestantism, or someone might practice Islam, another person, another religion, but hey, I need you to come help me with something, you come help me with something.
Right.
That kind of idea. I think that's the strength of America. But this could get into a totally different podcast, is culture. Where's American culture now? Where is the respect in decency and the, upstandingness? I personally think a lot of that has faded, and that's part of why you see American exceptionalism, American unity fading away, is because socially we are degrading before, and that is influencing politics.
Absolutely. And like I'll kind of reiterate this as we go on, but I'm sure you agree, it is the result of identity being rooted in social movements and ideologies as opposed to one cohesive force.
Well, I think we said it earlier, or I said it earlier. The identity of America is the identity of self. Mm-hmm. You are your God. You are your nation by yourself. You define what American is by being whatever you want to be,
right?
With no consideration to anybody else.
Mm-hmm. There
is no work produced for the greater good. That idea doesn't exist. It's for to not to better yourself. It's not a bad thing, but to gain what you can at the expense of other people. That is now, in my opinion, American identity.
Right. That's what the American dream has turned into.
The American dream has turned into that, yes.
Right. And that's interesting that you mentioned that. Sort of this individualistic, materialistic point of view. We are a consumer society. We're a hyper-capitalist society.
We are. We're a stage 4 nation. I don't know if you know what I'm referring
I don't.
to.
Yeah, no,
I don't know what the exact scale name is, but it has been quite a lot of years. As I'm 23, and this was when I was
oldie.
Well, yeah, this is probably to be when I was a freshman, or freshman or junior. No, freshman or sophomore, and I took AP Human History. But there's the definition of 5 stages of countries. We apparently haven't seen the 5th, but just to run up to it, I guess, is 4 is what the Western world state is.
Do you remember
That means
who came up with that stage system? Because
I-
I read one by Carol Quigley.
it
that was
might
very
that
similar.
sounds
Was it
very
Carol Quigley?
familiar. Yeah, and the 4 is characterized by it's a consumer nation,
Mm-hmm.
which means it does not manufacture really anything anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It only produces something to be consumed.
Right.
I.e., like you look at now, there's fast food on every single corner. What does that do for the greater scope? Do we barter and trade in food? No, we don't barter and trade in food. We just consume food, right? It's a product or it's an experience that we sell, right?
Right.
So that's part 4. And then birth rates either being like birth to death rates being level with each other, or the birth rate being lower than
It is
death.
lower.
The
only
exactly.
reason we have
But
population
that's
growth-
when it
yeah.
starts. Is like stage 4 starts when it's equal and then drops below, and then a stage 5 would be a total collapse of a country, which would be a cease of a country, which would be there are no births to keep up with the deaths, and it just ends the country because there's no one left.
Right. I mean, the only reason we have population growth in the United States is due to immigration. If you didn't have immigration, our population would be declining because the population is like once, and this is true of immigrant communities too. Once Americans sort of start to so let me think how to explain this. So obviously, a lot of immigrant groups will come in originally and be lower on the income scale,
Class scale, yeah.
right? But as second generation, then you kind of even out. Now, the only reason our population is growing is because of immigration. But even once individuals immigrate into the United States, then they also start having less children because once you get an education, you get more affluence. The birth rate goes down naturally.
I think that's another part of stage 4 is that the cost of living becomes so exceptionally, not necessarily exceptionally high, but comes to a point where having a kid is no longer an investment. Because in stage 1, 2, 3, you need a child to go farm. You need a child to go work in the factories. You need a child produces something for the family. They work for the community, so to speak, right? Your community being your family. And at stage 4, if either of us ever had a kid, what would they do for us? They would, this sounds really
cost money.
They would cost money. And actually, I think the scale says that the average American is born in 100,000 debt, according to the national gross debt. Right?
Really?
Right? Yeah. Or something like that. Maybe I could be wrong. One of the commenters, but I'm not
child labor.
I'm not an economic guy, but no. So, anyways, yes, at a stage 4, a child no longer does not produce, right? They actually cost you money, so you throw money into them. They take part of away your from your cost of living, or they are part of your cost of living. I don't know.
They contribute to your cost of living.
Contribute to your cost of living. There we go. And that's the way it is. And so people will. It's almost incentivized not to have a kid because they're going to lose money. So
yeah, naturally you're going to have declining.
And then that causes a 5.
Right.
It causes stage 5.
Right. So like you said, it may have been the Carol. So what I was referring to is there's a book called Evolution of Civilizations, and it's written by Carol Quigley, American historian. And he also talks about this stage system. It could have been the same one. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'd have to look it up. It's been years, but that always stuck with me from that class.
Right. And so this is very similar to what you were saying. He talks about how, so there's, you have these methods of growth within your civilization. So for example, trade is a method of growth, agriculture. You have all these different.
Those are in the early stages, yes.
What's that?
Those are in the early stages.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. When
so
you're growing. War could be a method of growth. But what's fundamental in all these is that they don't become institutionalized, that they're organically expanding on their own. Now, once you try to micromanage those individual things, then you start to run into problems, right? When you start having industry built around consumption, for example, rather than innovation, creating new technologies. You take farming, for example. In ancient Greece, you take the Spartans. They had their slave population were the Helots. They never had to improve their farming techniques because they had slaves to farm for them, right? So that was the institutionalization of the agricultural system. Because they had slaves, they didn't have to improve their farming techniques and further human innovations. Then they fell behind technologically. And, like you said, today, most of our industry is centered around consumption, providing things that humans can consume that don't really further our own technological advancement. Even though we do have a lot of technological advancements, obviously, perhaps as a result of this further stage, this decay in civilization, we aren't maximizing the potential that we have for advancement. And this goes into something that Carol Quigley talks about. He says, in order to progress as a civilization, you need just enough time. So if you have, like, let's say you have a 16 hours a day that you're awake, you're asleep for 8 hours a day, right? In those 16 hours a day, you could be working, relaxing, etc. You need enough time in that 16 hours that you can invent things, that you can think, that you can be creative, right? So if you're working all the time, you're never going to have human advancement. But at the same time, if you have a poor work ethic, if you have too much comfort, and you start to use your excess time for pleasure and for enjoyments rather than a means of overcoming certain obstacles in front of you, then you're never going to advance as a human civilization. That's why suffering, pain are necessary, because human innovation comes from trying to get rid of that suffering. If you don't suffer, then you have no reason to overcome it. Suffering is what creates technological advancements, right? The telephone. Oh, I can't talk to Granny. She's 200 miles away. Let's create a fucking telephone. My crops are very poorly irrigated. Okay, well let's revolutionize the way that we irrigate our land, right? Yeah. Through struggle, through hardships, through obstacles. That is how human innovation flourishes. So if you reach a stage in civilization where pretty much everything is fulfilled relatively easily, then you're no longer moving forward in terms of human innovation. The Helots, the Spartans, they had their agricultural problems perfected, right? Okay, well, we depend upon slave labor to do our agriculture, so we don't need to create any technologies that are going to make agriculture better. Once you reach a certain point in civilization where suffering is minimized, then you're also going to minimize your amount of human innovation and technological advancement.
Yes. I agree with that. That's why I think that we lack very many great inventors today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like names like Tesla and who else is great?
Well, even Elon Musk is from South Africa. Okay, he's from South Africa. He's not from the United States. Yeah,
I never knew this.
That is new to me.
You thought he was American? I thought he was.
You ever heard his accent?
I have, but I just thought it was the way he speaks.
No, he's from South Africa.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
So
that's
there you
new
go.
to me.
There you go. Though that's a non-American
Tesla was an
inventor.
immigrant too.
Yeah. Shout out to my boy Nikolai.
Right? But we also Nikolai. That's a very interesting character. Nikolai Tesla.
Oh yeah, he was in love with a bird.
Yeah. But,
talk about passion.
Maybe you know more about him than me, but no. So I just feel like we lack great
innovators,
yeah. Right? I mean, we have people like Bill Gates and stuff that have revolutionized technology and
mm-hmm.
the internet and stuff like that, which is a great leap. But I just don't think what do we lack nowadays? What do Americans really need?
Nothing that you can solve through human innovation. It's a spiritual problem that we have.
It is exactly. Yeah. It's the right. The
Great Depression is our lives. Our war is a spiritual war.
We could literally look at any almost middle class people, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is where a big part of America comes to is it's like the war over the middle class, right? Mm-hmm. We look at the middle class. They have a roof over their head. They have hot water.
Mm-hmm.
They have food. They have internet, which isn't a need. That's a want.
Commodity.
I mean, it can be a need depending on your business.
Right. Type. Yeah.
It's more a commodity.
It's more
right?
a commodity. Yeah.
So we really lack for nothing
mm-hmm.
in the U.S.
Right.
However, we don't see that as it, and I would say I think that's also a very American thing too.
Mm-hmm.
And I've also heard this from friends from Europe, is Americans don't realize how good we have it compared mm-hmm. to other countries. And I remember my European friends from Germany, we have AC and heating, right? That's not a thing in like most of Germany, right?
Really?
Nope. Hot showers, not a thing in Germany, right? They live kind of a little bit more like old style that way, right?
Gotcha.
But in America, we can turn every shower to hot, and we can turn on the AC when it's hot, and we can turn the heater on when it's cold.
I will say this: when I went to Europe, I was surprised by how many old stone buildings there were. Like in the United States, you see our cities. You know, these great marvels of human ingenuity. They're all newer buildings. They're all high.
Yeah, I think that's also part of the crisis with America is that we are so young. You know, we're 250 plus years old. But that is just a drop in the bucket of just humanity, and it's just growing pains. That's what I think it is. Whether the empire falls or not, I don't know. But hey, it could continue on for another 1,000 years. Who knows?
Hopefully.
Who knows? I mean, Rome was around a very long time.
Yeah.
Greece around a very long time. Everything comes to an end. But for now, 250 years is very young. 250 plus years, rather.
Everything comes to an end, but all those different empires also didn't exist at a time of technological advancement like we have today.
That is true. So does that shorten the timeline?
Or does it extend it?
Or does it extend it? Yeah.
Because there's a human singularity where you reach a point of technological advancement where there is no end. You know, you're just because you look at 200 years ago. If you tried to explain the concept of a cellular device to a common person, they would have no clue what you're talking about. Now, you go back 20 years ago and you try to explain to someone the concept of iPhone, they still don't know what the hell you're talking about. Just think about the advancement that we've experienced.
Well, yeah, I mean, that goes into what is the correct term? Is it every advancement in technology is like, it's like not double, it's like where the gap becomes shorter and shorter because the technology, as you create a new technology, it actually furthers the speed of the advancement of the next one.
Right.
And then the next one gets it even shorter time. There's a correct term for that. What is the term?
I know what you're talking about, but I can't
remember the exact term right now.
Right. But it's like,
but yes,
you're going to reach that singularity where it's just constant growth eventually.
Yes.
And then maybe that
will.
But
what is it growth in? You know what I'm saying?
That's a good point.
We're moving to a virtual world. Physical means less now than it did before.
Right.
Almost our whole lives are on the internet.
Yeah, which is,
think about it.
It's like you mentioned, human. So, I mean, we talk about a lack of human innovation today. It's not necessarily just innovation. So we have a lot of technological advancement, but they're all to fulfill consumer desire.
Yes.
Like you take, when you were mentioning who nowadays has created things, I thought of Mark Zuckerberg. Then I thought, well, he didn't create anything that really furthers human innovation.
When I say created something, I mean something that I can put my hands on.
Right.
That no longer, I think, really exists for a lot of stuff because we don't really. There's not a need to produce. People produce things because there is a need for it.
An economic need.
Right? There's a gap there that has to be filled. But most of our common needs have been met. So now we move to the metaverse.
Well, that's what I mean. Economic. So an economic need in terms of what can sell. Right? It's no longer what is going to get man on Mars. It's about what is going to allow me to sell the most of my product. So instead of innovating in the sense that we're creating rocket ships that are going to take us, tens of thousands, millions of miles away, instead it's, okay, I'm going to create the iPhone 16, which looks exactly like the iPhone 15, but if I make a couple of modifications, I'm still going to be able to sell, millions of dollars worth of iPhones. The greatest
part is that for what it's manufactured at, you pay way more.
Right. So human innovation, when we think of human innovation, the way that we're talking about innovation in the sense that you're not furthering an economic need. You're furthering a sort of
a leap for man.
Exactly.
You're manufacturing something that will change mankind. Yeah.
Right. And because ultimately, Facebook, did it really change mankind in any way other than fulfilling an economic need? Right? It's a commodity.
No, I would say no. I think the world could absolutely work without it, and it's been proven that the world can work without it.
Right. It's not a necessity.
We had trade before Facebook. We had friends internationally before Facebook.
Right. Probably in a more meaningful way as well. Who knows?
Probably, absolutely. I would say that 100%.
Right.
Right. If you look at someone's Facebook list, or we'll do something a little more. Facebook's getting kind of dated now. Yeah. We'll go to Instagram, which is still owned by Facebook. Yeah. Facebook is right.
Meta. Excuse me.
Meta. Someone might have 10,000 followers. what does that really mean? Do they have 10,000 followers? Think about that for a minute. 10,000 followers. If you could put if that person, if it wasn't a bot, if it was an actual person, imagine the mass of power. When you think about that, this goes into leadership, right? Kind of like a leader or power, right? If you could actually bring those 10,000 people into an arena and have them be like, we are looking at you. You have our own full divided attention.
Right.
But you wouldn't even probably be able to get a quarter of those people
Not
to actually
quarter.
come, because when you think about it, that's exactly what happens on Instagram. They get this huge feed. They don't even see you. They just keep scrolling past you, or they go like this. That's all you are.
Not even
that's
a quarter,
all you.
like
that's all you are to someone.
A 0.1%, maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's all you're 0.10 of a second to somebody, which is insane. Which means you really are nothing.
It's an illusion
which I think is very another interesting point is this growth of influencers through social media.
Right.
They don't produce anything.
No.
They are a consumer. They
try to entertain.
They are the product for the consumer, right? They are the entertainment, right?
Right.
And we're kind of feeding into that machine a little bit here, but ours is different because it's pointed at trying to grow yourself.
Exactly.
But what do most of the people who produce content that's the word, content make? Nothing but to be consumed that does nothing for you.
Which is why I say we're not feeding into that. Because, see...
Yeah, we're going against it in reality, but we're
Right.
using the platform that they use.
Sure, but that's what you gotta do.
Yeah.
See, the thing is, when I started, this idea, I never just... So first of all, here's the three things. First, it's not entertainment, This is more than that. Two, I never meant to just be someone who teaches philosophy. There's a lot of people on YouTube that will teach about philosophy.
You want to exercise philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. Which is my third point. I want to provide my own interpretations, which means something. I think that there is a void in terms of ideas that need to be fulfilled, and the only way to fulfill that is if individuals go on their own volition. See, there's a difference between someone who studies philosophy and a philosopher. I think someone who studies philosophy could have way more knowledge than I do about philosophy. But a true philosopher is someone who contributes their own ideas, and as a result of their study of philosophy, they have compiled what they believe is the most valuable of all the different philosophers and create their own school of philosophy. And that's what I want to do with this. This is why I want to really separate myself from all this bullshit TikTok, dancing to music, whatever. I mean, art is beautiful, but that's not art. True art and great art is art that is created for the sake of doing something no one else has done. Like you look at, look at Picasso. What is that? That's beautiful, but it's beautiful not because it's not like looking at Mona Lisa.
It's not aesthetic. It's
unique.
It's unique. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
The same way that nowadays people aren't creating what's unique. They have there's a formula.
There's a format for everything. Yeah.
Right. There's a formula of how to get popular. There's a formula of how to hit the algorithms. There's a formula on how to appeal to a wider audience, and people follow that. That's why you see many musical artists. As soon as they start getting famous, their music changes.
Oh no, yeah, they sell out. I know that 100%. They sell out to the label companies. Yes.
Right. They create mainstream music that more people, a wider audience can consume because it's profitable, rather than sticking to the purity of
what got them popular in the first place. That's why
Exactly.
usually, in my opinion, every album of any artist that you like is probably going to be the first album, because that's genuinely them before they get famous.
Right. And that's why I think, now this is funny, but I think that the reason there's such, like a lot of artists die young, there's like the 27 Club, whatever. The reason why I think there's a certain mystique behind those individuals because they never quite got to the point where they sold out to mainstream audiences. So there's something pure about them. They will always be pure because they died before they can become corrupted by
The machine.
Exactly, the machine,
Yeah.
the Matrix.
Yeah.
Right? The Matrix that turns
Oh, no, we're
you.
back.
No, but the Matrix is a great analogy.
Time to get red pilled.
No. I hate. All right, so here's the thing.
Okay.
I think the idea of red pill needs to be reworked. People nowadays think red pilled is like being like Andrew Tate, like, oh, I'm gonna have sex with lots of women and make money. It's such bullshit. That's not what being red pilled
That's
is.
not what I mean when I say red pill.
Yeah, being red pilled is recognizing that most individuals go through life as NPCs without really thinking about why they believe in certain things, without practicing self-reflection. So Socrates says, he basically says a life that's not I want to find let me just look up the exact quote because it's a brilliant quote and I think it really illustrates what I want to articulate. So, let's see, Socrates, Life of Self-Examination. And this is one of my favorite quotes.
I'm surprised you haven't brought up the Bruce Lee one yet.
Oh, we'll go into that. So, the unexamined life is not worth living. The unexamined life is not worth living. And I think that's absolutely true. How are you really a human if you're not exercising your God-given, like, all right, just like the word God-given right to self-awareness? That's what makes us human.
I think that brings up an interesting point too. Is being we've kind of gone off this tangent, which isn't bad. But I'm gonna try to bring it back here when it comes to leadership. I mean, that's not leadership of a group necessarily, but leadership and power of knowing yourself or trying to learn yourself. I just thought in the car the other day, can one really know oneself? I think we have ideas of ourselves, but I don't think you can fully attain yourself.
But I think you try to get as close to the truth as possible.
You try to get as close as you can. This pursuit of truth, right?
Right.
The pursuit of knowledge of yourself and the greater world. But what my one thing is that I think about this is how many people actually think about themselves? Now, when I say that, I don't mean what they can do for themselves. How many people go, who is
me,
Patrick? Who is Austin? And try to figure themselves out. Right. I don't think very many people nowadays really go, who is?
Right.
And once you realize that, and I remember the first time I had that thought was probably in like when I was 12 or 13. It was like an epiphany. Like it was like I stepped up. Like there was like a level of like, wow, I've never thought about myself. Like of who I am. I've just existed and done. But I've never thought about why do I do what I do.
It's the thing. People know what their what is, but they never know what their why is.
Exactly.
Right? And that's why. So that's why. All right. I understand there will always be leaders and followers, and ultimately, if you want to be a leader in life, you have to ask the question: why do I like? Why do I do what I do? Why do I believe what I believe in? Practice self-reflection, self-examination, because ultimately, and this might sound a little controversial, but I think some humans are more alive than others. I don't just mean that.
I would say that makes you more evolved. That makes you more evolved is that you've thought at a higher level.
Right.
Which then makes you the leader over the group.
So now we're talking about Ubermensch kind of mentality. Because that is essentially what Nietzsche is describing.
Right. I mean, like, we might bring it up too, is I keep saying this guy will really like Ernst Junger's On Pain. And I think Ernst Junger is very good. But Ernst Junger talks about if you can basically overcome pain, then yes, he doesn't use the exact term to my knowledge, Ubermensch, but yes, you'll become the stronger man.
Right. And that is a result of, so somebody walked by outside. That was kind of messing my train of thought. Anyway, can't let the distractions distract me. No. But, where was I going with that? So, I mean, essentially, that is the Ubermensch, is somebody who, because Nietzsche in Das Buch Zarathustra says the Ubermensch to man is what ape is what man is to ape, right? So from ape to man, man to Ubermensch, right? And the reason I say some humans are more alive than others, and it's like it kind of relates to what you said about in your analogy to Ernst Junger. That's right. I do believe that some humans are more alive than others. And like you said, so Ernst Junger uses pain, Nietzsche uses the word suffering, but essentially it's kind of describing the same sort of idea.
They're both German, so I would say it's probably the same word for pain, which is Schmerz.
Schmerz? Okay.
Schmerz, yeah.
I'll have to read some of Nietzsche's works in German.
We'll see.
But some humans are more alive than others because what is consciousness, right? It's being self-aware. Like the what makes humans unique to just normal animals is that we know we're going to die one day. You know, we have the ability to think rationally in an irrational world, which is why we have so much anxiety and depression. You know, it's quite an interesting thing to really think about. But ultimately, some humans are less alive than others. And I'm not talking about, obviously someone's in a coma. They're not going to be able to exercise their self-awareness. But there are normal people who are living this allegorical coma, an allegorical matrix. They're stuck in it. They're stuck in the idea that there is a set path to how you should live your life. And this is sort of the result of a capitalist, sort of
Your script.
world. Right.
It's sold to you.
Exactly.
I think people are treated as products nowadays.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard the phrase that the problem, and it's like one of those white girl quotes, but it has truth in it, is that the problem with people nowadays is that they love their things and they use people.
Man's is a means to an end. And that's, I think Kant talks about it, Immanuel Kant and Martin Heidegger. Man should not be a means to an end. Man's is a means in himself, meaning that we shouldn't see. The problem is when you start to see people as products, it's really no different than slavery. The idea of slavery is that you use another human being for your own ends and their autonomy doesn't matter. Now, obviously, it's not that extremely bad in today's world, but it's this allegorical slavery in the sense that ultimately, in the system that we live in today, people are products for the benefit of individuals who own companies, individuals who are placed above them on the social or economic hierarchy. Man has become a means to an end, the end which is economic prosperity for a select few individuals, right?
Yes.
And that's crazy. And that's good that you mentioned that, because it started making me think about what Heidegger said about it and Kant. And that's really the issue of, it goes back to the agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, all these different means of institutionalizing human advancement and turning it into something in which people can benefit economically. And I don't know if you're familiar at all with Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
I've heard the name. No, I'm not familiar. Familiar with works though.
Okay, so he says that the agricultural revolution is one of the worst things that humans had ever gone through, and obviously, we are where we are now. So let's not pretend like we're gonna go past.
I say yes, but no. Yeah, a little bit of both.
Right, but I do get his point. So what he says is that there's two different ways to look at the state of nature. Thomas Hobbes he talks about the Leviathan. He wrote the book The Leviathan, and Thomas Hobbes is of the opinion that in the state of nature, humans live in a constant state of war, and that's why you need institutions such as the government to protect people's rights. But Rousseau talks about the state of nature as actually being more peaceful and people living in harmony with one another. But he talks about how humans were healthier before the agricultural revolution, how humans actually may have lived longer, had healthier bone structures. Diet, for example, the diet of more like grain focused through farming definitely has had an impact on our bones, on our teeth. You can prove this through science. But I know I'm not saying that Jean-Jacques Rousseau is right, but I do think he has a point in terms of before you have things like the agricultural revolution, or extensive socialization of humans in specific hierarchies, man was not a means to an end. But through the institutionalization of specifically formatting human labor in a way that benefits specific people, now man has become a means to an end rather than a means in himself.
I guess that we can roll us into one of our other points, which is the topic of fear, love, and respect, in referencing not just those topics in themselves, but in relation to someone leading. Mm-hmm. We live in a or not a postmodern. Yes, but
postmodern,
but post agricultural revolution. Right?
Sure.
And there's no reversing that. So the people have become means to an end, regardless of whether we want it that way or not. At least here in the Western world,
right?
It's still very the disparity between the Western world and the rest of the world is different, But we're talking about the Western world. What is, I guess you have to define what is love for a leader, what is respect for a leader, and what is fear of a leader.
Or in a collective group, which essentially takes the place of the leader. Just whatever is the means of controlling the power, right? Because either it's an individual person or it's a collective group of people, right?
We're going to go about this in the way of, we're going to talk about those three aspects with anybody in control, rather control of whatever it is.
The only reason I delineate it is because, you take a democracy, the president is not the person who holds all the power.
Yeah, it's a collection.
Right.
Body.
So all I'm getting at is that you either have one person in charge or you have a group of people in charge.
Yeah.
So
the leadership.
Right. So either way, it's love for this. So if I like to say if it's a group of people that run it, whether it's an oligarchy or if it's mob rule, it's it's power of the collective group that rules it. And if we're talking about a person, it's that specific person, either the system or the individual.
So what would you define as love, respect, and fear of that group.
So it's interesting that you. So I'm gonna go into I'm gonna go into respect and fear first, because I think that there is something that I have to say about love, which I haven't really thought about before, and something that I kind of came up with a few days ago, which I think maybe will be a little bit more insightful in terms of what we're talking about, and something that we haven't discussed personally before. But first, I'll talk about fear and respect. So fear, obviously, is pretty straightforward. If you demonstrate your ability to exercise your power, people, if people have dissent towards you, if people don't respect your authority, then it's like Machiavelli says, the first thing you should do when you take power is exercise your power to its to the absolutes, to the full extent, so that you never have to do it again, because people see, oh shit, this guy will exercise his power if necessary, and we should not try to go against it. That's fear, right? Fear is knowing that if you go against the structure of power, you will be shot down. If it's a system like today, for example, some people don't want to speak out against the kind of lifestyle that most people live because they're afraid of being ostracized by the rest of society, right? So some people make fun of us for making the allegory of the Matrix. They'll say, you're stupid, everything's fine, It's not fine. I see people every day living a meaningless life. It's not fine. It's not okay. That's power. If we were afraid of speaking against what we see, right? That would be respecting the power of the system. If it's an individual, then you can go into dictatorship. If somebody in North Korea says Kim Jong-un looks a little chubby one day, then naturally Kim Jong-un's probably going to have him off. That's power of an individual. You don't want to disrespect the authority of that sovereign. So that's fear, which inherently breeds respect. Naturally, I think if you fear someone, you also respect them. But I think you can.
So what do you think about people will say that if you love someone, you'll respect them too?
It depends on what kind of love it is, right?
That's a good question. That's why I asked you because I think it's very easy to find fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, in my opinion, I would totally agree with your definition of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, the answer of what is respect is a mixture of fear and love, but we have to define what love is first before we can get to the answer of what is respect then, because we've defined only half of it.
Right. It's all about escalation, right? Escalation of force. The kind of love that as a leader you want to attain is not the kind of love that can be taken advantage of. So, or the kind of love that's unconditional. If you can't have unconditional love as a leader.
This is what I would say to answer.
Mm-hmm.
Love in the context of leadership, or power,
Mm-hmm.
which is bestowed upon you with leadership. It's the willingness of the subordinates to give up their time, their effort, and even their lives for you out of admiration for a cause or a person.
That's the combination you're saying?
Yes, it's basically love is selfishness based upon the merits of the leader.
Selfishness from who?
Well, I guess both. You could argue both, but I mean, in this sense, is like the people following want to give everything.
Right.
Because
they feel empowered by it.
Yeah, because they feel empowered by it. So it's a gratitude. It's almost a gratitude, right?
Sure.
And that's what I think love is in a leadership type role, or between the followers and the leader in the power dynamic there.
That's one aspect of it for sure, right? Because
you could say fear is they don't do anything out of line because the consequences. And then you could say the inverse is love. They don't do anything out of line because they want to be seen as good followers.
Right. What if like I said, I had something I wanted to say about love, and I'll get into that soon. What if there was a sort of power that came devoid of any fear? Imagine being so powerful that you didn't need any fear in order to gain the respect and the subordination of individuals. Imagine that.
I would say that you would be perfect then, and then if we went into perfect being, you would be God.
Would you need perfection, or would you just need authenticity? Because I think that the reason, there will never be 100% consensus of that something's right or someone's right.
Sure, but 51%
because we're individual, right? right? Essentially,
It can't. I mean, it depends.
if you have 10 people and they're all equal in strength and in intelligence, then if you have 11 versus the 9, then you have everyone.
So you're talking about democracy,
Kind of.
majority
Well,
rule.
Democracy functions the same way as an autocracy because if you have more power, you win. The idea of a democracy is supposed to be that, well, the people decide who gets power, but really it's the same as an autocracy. It's whoever has not necessarily the larger side, but the more powerful side. So if anything, a democracy is sort of each individual has an equal, supposedly, right? Each individual has an equal amount of power, whereas an autocracy, it doesn't matter if you don't have the numbers, but if you have the more powerful numbers, then you win. You could have 10% of the population in an autocracy, but if those 10% are more capable than the other 90%, then you win. Whereas in a democracy, it's, well, everyone has an equal amount of power, supposedly, within the electoral system. But that's not really what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is, I mean, it kind of relates to it, but so love and beauty, right? People will, I mean, what is beauty, right?
What is beauty? It's
Yeah.
in the eye of the beholder.
Sure, but beauty, you can't have beauty without ugliness. So there has to be,
You have to define what it is.
right? There can't be just beautiful things. If everything was beautiful, then nothing would be beautiful.
That's like saying if everything's good, then nothing's
Right.
They
Which-
both have to coexist.
They both have to exist. You need duality. Now, the reason I bring up beauty, because I'm thinking about true power. What is true power? You take a figure like Christ. I'm talking about the biblical Christ.
Okay. Yeah.
The biblical Christ did not rule by fear. He did not have the support of his disciples or apostles due to fear. It was due purely to love. It was due purely to people beholding the beauty of what Christ was and following him. Because you see a very different image of God in the New Testament versus the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, you see a sort of vindictive God that,
It's a god of fear.
right, that would punish. He flooded the whole world because he perceived them as living in debauchery, right? And only Noah and his immediate family could survive.
Yeah.
This is a very different image to Christ, which is the representation of God on earth in the New Testament, which is one of forgiveness. Even the Roman soldiers who crucify him, he says, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." So there's no fear because he's not even blaming the people who kill him himself. It's this very different image. But the idea of Christ, without inspiring love and inspiring respect without fear, is what I really want to get into with my idea of beauty. And I wrote down a few things I'd like to read to you if I could find them, because I write a lot. I like to read. Whenever I read, I like to write a lot of different things. So I kind of end up with way more than I intend to. So this is something I wrote. This is not going to be grammatically super perfect because I like to write like in a journal site type sense. I was going to get ideas down, and later on when I want to like show people this works, then I'll like edit it. But this is unedited. So I said, some people command power and respect from submission of others. Their power makes other people addicted to them. This is why humans gravitate towards powerful people, because it is in our nature to worship power. For in our essence, we know power ensures our survival. Some people, great people, even more powerful than he who requires the submission of others, is like a beautiful sunset. The powerful man who demands submission is like an addiction to drugs or alcohol. The attachment to the drug or alcohol demands submission to the addiction. The powerful man who demands nothing, who is beautiful, and asks for nothing from those who behold his beauty, the beautiful thing that doesn't ask for attention, who allows people to admire him like a sunset, wanting nothing from them, that is a truly powerful man. For his power is not built on fear or demands, but on something much greater. Metaphysical, stronger than the intoxication of human power. The man who is powerful purely for what they are has evolved beyond human. Ubermensch, the greater man. Evolved from primitive human nature. True power, true greatness, that is beauty. Beautiful things don't ask for attention. And that's this idea I have of what human evolution could be. What if we evolved to a state where humans didn't worship power in the traditional sense, and power was like a beautiful sunset? It doesn't require anything from you, but you choose to look at that beautiful sunset anyway. Unlike, alcohol, which you can become addicted to. You enjoy drinking it. It demands something. You lose something for giving to it, but you don't lose anything from watching a sunset except for your time, but you choose to give that time to watching the sunset. And that's a beautiful thing. And that's why I think perhaps if we evolve as humans, we can evolve to a point where it doesn't take fear to warrant respect. We can achieve a point where human power is rooted in pure beauty, true authenticity, which is someone gives themselves fully to the audience, to the people that see them, shows themselves for what they are, says what they want to do. And then maybe if we can evolve as humans, we can respect that as a symbol of power rather than having to rely on these sort of primitive measures of fear and execution of submission. That is something perhaps that we can reach one day. And once I hear your thoughts, I do want to get to Fight Club at some point because I want to.
We have to talk about literally new characters we do.
Right.
Because I've actually thought about Fight Club a couple times. You've mentioned some stuff, especially about what we said about people being the product and being consumers nowadays. I'm going to tell you, that blew me out of the water. That's very good. I'm just going to slam you with a little bit of reality. I don't think that'll happen.
Not yet.
Not in our lifetime, I don't think it'll happen. I think
it won't happen
evolutionarily, it might happen. But I don't think it'll happen.
It won't happen.
Mortal lives, I don't think it'll happen.
It won't happen if you believe it won't happen. No, I'm serious.
I get you. I know. I get the idea of like
hey, power. Let me quote something.
Oh my
Power is having every justification to kill, but choosing to pardon them anyway. That's from Schindler's List. Now, the reason I mention that is because that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you being such a powerful being. I'm not saying that you don't have any power. I'm not saying you are just a beautiful sunset. No, you have fucking armies behind you. You have guns and everything. But it's having all those things
and not needing them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I get your point. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
that's still evolution.
That's not about the person. That's not about the beauty of the leader. It's about the beauty of people actually becoming good followers, becoming a community, becoming social in that aspect. And that is something we have yet to perfect.
For now.
Yes.
But look at Jesus. The idea of Jesus. These ideas have existed thousands of years in our past. It's just a matter of bringing them into fruition. We can talk about that at a later time. This is complex.
So I guess we'll transition to literally me characters. This is kind of like perfect girl. Yeah. I guess it's kind of like the more fun, like silly part of the podcast.
It's not silly.
Well, there's some serious
ramifications.
I mean, yeah, you like my business card. You don't know how it is. Patrick Bateman's business card.
Let's see Paul Allen's card.
Right.
So, that's a good one. No, I should get a Paul Allen one. For
there is a Paul Allen one. There's a Paul Allen one. I should put a link in the description. Everyone start buying them. But no. So at one point that I thought of Fight Club is when we talked about the individual becoming your objects basically ruling you, right? And in
the things you own,
end up owning you, right? And in that, right, if you guys haven't seen Fight Club, I'm sure many of you have, but basically we all know that the main character gets consumed by his items. He lives for his items. That's all he does. He goes to work as a slave to the system in his cubic office that's colorless and lifeless.
Just like him.
And he performs like a machine and to go home to buy products and to define himself by these products, or what he believes defines him, which is his earthly treasures. And then Tyler Durden comes in and burns it all to the ground and proceeds to tell him that you're not your fucking khakis. So that's what we need to get to is it bad to have items? No. I have a lot of items too, and there's things I cherish. However, here's a good example is his house burnt down in that. So did mine. Mine actually also did burn down one time, and I lost absolutely everything. Damn. You know what I realized from that? That my items are not me. Right. That I'm me, and I was alive. And I could have been very well dead. Luckily, I wasn't in the house when it burnt down. My other family members...
Is your alter ego?
My other family members were.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, but I was not there, but one of the first places that caught fire was
Your room?
my room.
No shit.
Yeah, so I could have been sleeping on fire and probably
Jesus.
died or been seriously burned, right?
Crazy.
But what I learned from that was, yes, I was very upset, but within an hour, I realized it can all be replaced. That if I had died, I could not be replaced. That my family members could not be replaced. So I wasn't my items. And since that day, I've respected my items more, and I do take better care of my items, and I cherish them more. But also at the same time, every time I look at them, I'm like, this can be replaced.
You're not consumed.
I'm not consumed by them. No,
you're not. You're fucking khakis. You know what you are? You're the all singing, all dancing crap of the world.
That's right.
No, but you forgot to mention one good thing earlier when you're talking about this guy in his cubicle, the narrator. Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy.
Yeah.
When space exploration takes off, all the new galaxies will be named after the corporations, right?
Yeah.
Microsoft, Stratosphere, whatever the fuck.
So yeah, you're not basically your items,
Right?
Which I think is a very good message, and it's a very good movie from that. The kind of rolls also the idea of like everything being uniformed kind of rolls into American Psycho. Everyone in there, and this also relates to our culture too, right? So in this case, the Fight Club shows society being consumed by what it buys, right? I think American Psycho shows you being consumed by going along with trends. You not being you anymore.
Right, because he's an abstraction.
He's an abstract.
Right.
Well,
It's an idea of a Patrick Bateman.
Kind of, but exactly. But why does he say that? Well, for instance, the business card scene, right? I have, which I have this as
Hey, show that there.
as a meme. Right? Oh, I don't think it's gonna come up. Oh, there we go. It's blurry, but you can see it. It's basically Patrick Bateman's card. That's all it is. Right. So in that's a really good scene to define what I'm trying to say is he slides his card and he says, well, look what I have. And then all the rest of the people slide all their cards. And if you look at every single card, they all say the same thing. And we cannot tell the difference.
Right.
But Patrick Bateman has almost a meltdown because his card isn't looked at as being the best. But we're like, here as the audience, we're like, well, they all look the same. But that being accepted by what you have and being accepted for being like, he wears Adidas and I wear whatever the hell this is, right? Being defined by that. Those kind of things.
I have one of these too.
Yeah, well, I forget what company it is, but I don't care, right? But defining ourselves not by what we have, but by names, it becomes identity. We project an identity. That's part of it with products, but also another part is in there when he kills Paul Allen, the other guy thinks he's Hammerstrom. We don't really take like precedence of like who we're talking with. Like, no, and this kind of goes back to like, have people examine themselves? Well, do people really have conversations nowadays? What do people talk about?
They ask, what do you do for a living?
What do you do for a living, right? That. Or they go ask you trivial questions about, all right, what football do you like? What, like that kind of thing. I'm not trying to hate on football. I'm not hating on sports. I'm not hating on sports. I'm just saying that. Does anyone really go, how are you today?
Just to say, I'm pretty good. How are you?
Yeah, but they don't actually mean how are you.
Right.
Like,
it's just
we don't ask genuine questions. We don't want to really get to know somebody, right? Yes, we might get to know our friends, but we don't really do that with every other person. Like many people, right? We ought to. We ought to. But we don't. And I think that's a really good example of American Psycho is that people want to be, as he said in the car, I just want to fit in. So he'll get all of the clothing. He'll go to all of the, restaurants. He'll have the haircut.
He'll read the editorials on Huey Lewis in the news.
Huey Lewis in the news. Because he wants to fit in. Just at the end of the day, to say the same exact lines everyone doesn't believe. And if the thing about American Psycho, it should be a warning that we should really, truly have conversations with each other. And we should really just accept that everyone has their own thing and that they're an individual and that your interests are not my interests, but I'm going to respect your interests and like define yourself. Right. And that's why at the end of the whole movie, why is he killing people? that's when he feels like he can truly become himself, because you're pinning up, in an example movie, he's pinning up his true self. He becomes the idea of Patrick Bateman, which is the guy who goes to the office and eats at all these restaurants and wears this or that and does this or that skin routine. But really, he's letting his true self would be the murderous Patrick Bateman. And I think that should be a warning, because at the end of the day, if you follow these trends and you do these things for trying to get Instagram famous and stuff, you start to sell your soul to these things, and you kind of do start losing an identity, and it's really a warning for identity crisis.
It's an allegorical idea of selling your soul to the devil.
Yeah,
it's an allegory.
We can't have an identity crisis, which I think we're having based on it's really an identity crisis based on what do we define ourselves on. And people, the first thing they grasp for is products, which is an example of Fight Club, or trends, which is American Psycho.
Right. And going off of that, I don't know if you're familiar at all with the philosophy of Hannah Arendt.
No.
Okay, so she was sort of student, and I think she was the mistress of Martin Heidegger. So Martin Heidegger was phenomenal. I mentioned him earlier when I talked about man is not the means. Funny enough, he was actually so he was in Germany during World War II, and he ended up becoming a Nazi, for a little while, and
as many people did,
if they were in Germany, So he has a little bit of a what do you call it?
Dark history.
Sure. But Hannah Arendt was actually Jewish, and I think I forget if they had like a affair together, but they were very close either way. And I believe she's Jewish, so that might have been, she left Germany I think she was a Holocaust survivor, so she would have actually been in Germany. I don't exactly know the whole story, but anyway, she has a special perspective regarding like evil and stuff. And she says that the reason why you have mass movements like Nazism and fascism are, like you said, as a result of people becoming their possessions, becoming their jobs. That's why they started supporting movements like the Nazi movement, because it was about something beyond materialism. It was about, for example, blood and soil, this idea of ultranationalism, and that was a result of people becoming members of a society that were purely defined by their possessions, their jobs, and how they contributed to the economic machine. And that's why they feel so lifeless, and they start to seek meaning in these popular movements, which can end up being very evil, like we talked about in the My Nature of Evil video, the 10-minute philosophy and collective groups.
I think we also talked about it here, is that part of what propagates that soulless machine mentality is capitalism and being individual. And one thing is that the Nazis would always say is, and this really isn't really translatable to English, but I'll try to get it, Volksgemeinschaft, which literally, in literal sense, means like the people togetherness or unity of the people. And what that means is not just unity, like we're all going to go vote or we're all going to do this thing. It means your neighbor needs something, you give them something. The community needs something, you sacrifice for the community. We all chip in to build a bigger, better country, right? And so I feel like that's part of why Nazism had a huge allure, because that broke class structure.
Right.
The businessman was
He was just German.
He was just German, right? And he was just trying to produce jobs for the, regular people. And the regular people were trying to produce because they knew they were going to produce for the country.
Also, it wasn't just there will be no it wasn't just there will be no unemployment. Unemployment will be illegal. You must work. Know? So there was 0% unemployment rate, famously, because everyone was contributing to this sort of greater idea, which is why it was so what's the word I'm looking for? Attractive and alluring for people who for many years existed as means to an end, economic means to an end for individuals with money, individuals who exercise their economic power through exploitation of lower classes. And Hannah Arendt said idea is that today, like I said, what do we ask? What's the first question you pretty much ask everyone?
Where do you work, or what do you do for a living?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's no longer what are you, what do you believe in? It's how do you contribute economically to the economic machine? That is your identity. That is your value, is how you contribute economically. And that's the idea in this capitalist system. And you can go into further. I think one of the things that people don't spend enough time is studying the philosophers that criticize democracy, criticize this capitalist system, and advocate for autocracy. Because if you don't understand that, then you understand how autocracy is formed, and you don't understand how people can easily be manipulated in a way which leads to popular movements that we would never really perceive as possible.
We should. I get the interest of studying what is savory, but you should most dedicate more time to studying what is unsavory.
What is ugly?
What is ugly?
Yeah.
Because if you study only the good, you will not see the dangers of the bad, and you will not be aware of the evil or the pitfall again. And that's, in my personal opinion, a big part of what America does not do now. Is I love history, and one of the first things I learned about history was, or that I had a self-reflection of, is, people are like, oh, all the dates, all the names, like it's boring. Is I realized that these people were living a similar story I was, just in a different time, and that all of it can happen again, and that I better heed what their story and understand their story, so I can better myself.
Could happen again is a great thing
Yep.
to bring up, because first of all, history repeats itself and everything's reactionary. So, for example, you take our, like I've described many times, our society is a postmodernist society. Postmodernism is sort of the opposite of sort of these social movements which advocate for a strong identity. So, like for example, you see
living in the Weimar Republic.
That's the issue, right?
We're living in Weimar America. Yeah,
so,
I know. Yeah.
So the problem is if you have, so I would say generally politics, popular politics in America is generally left-leaning, right? Now the problem is that if you go too far left, the response is going to be not just normal right, it's going to be far right. So you're really testing the waters for a hard
people
reaction.
Are probably going to react to this very negatively, but I'll say this. Historically, well, I won't say all, but majority of far right-wing movements, they're reactionaries. They're not revolutionaries. The left-wing movements are always revolutionaries. They always seek to destroy something that is and overthrow it. While when they go into action, you have the reactionaries who want to destroy the movement, trying to overthrow it and destroy the movement. And capitalize as well. I would call them really reactionary revolutionaries. They react to a revolution and then they counter the revolution with the revolution.
That's how they would describe themselves.
Yeah, that's what the Nazis would call themselves.
Because it was a result of there was a significant communist movement within Germany, so that's how they became powerful.
Yep.
And that's why if we want to stop history from repeating itself, we have to understand it. So
if you stop polarizing.
Right. Yeah. So if you allow an ultra, for example, if you allow an ultra left wing movement to sort of alienate moderate right wing people, they're going to become far right people, because that's going to be their only option to counter far left movement. So if you want to create sort of normalcy in politics, and you want to create actual cohesion and avoid ignorance, then you have to realize that the only way to do that is to not allow one side to get too powerful, because that's only going to embolden the other side.
You just explained victimhood.
I mean, essentially.
Which is one of the greatest recruiters for extreme ideologies.
Yeah, because you are being othered.
I'm disenfranchised by this one group. No one will hear me, so I'm going to join a group that's going to actually take action.
That's why people support Andrew Tate.
Yes, that's a perfect example, actually. Yes.
Because masculinity is a good thing, but then instead of having a good, healthy masculinity, you start to find the extremes. I hate the word toxic masculinity because it's used incorrectly many times. But if I will use the word, it describes.
Yeah, I would say what most people would refer to as toxic masculinity is not toxic masculinity, but there is a such thing.
And
toxic masculinity. Yes, which is really not masculinity, because I think you've mentioned this. Masculinity is to empower people.
Right. You're protecting
not to
the
subjugate
weak. Right.
People.
You're protecting the weak. Yeah.
It's to grab someone up from the ocean of life and bring them into a life raft, not proceed to sail past them.
Yeah, which is kind of what
Andrew Tate does. Well, Andrew Tate, I don't want to go completely on this.
Right.
I would say he's capitalist to his core.
Oh, yeah. That's what I'm talking about. Materialism.
He cares nothing about except for his own material gain. And any man, yes, he might say things that are some things that are correct, yes. But at the end of the day, it's just to sell a product to you. That's what any crafty salesman will do. They'll tell you the truth, or majority of it tell you the truth, and then they'll spin it into a ploy to sell you something.
That's why I call him a charismatic con man.
Yeah.
In the end of my video, but that's why I said, he's a charismatic con man who is convinced, blah, blah. Anyway, but that's what he is. He's very, He's a good salesman, right?
Yep.
I mean, I enjoy watching his videos for the content of just pure like entertainment. So I don't. So I won't say this. I won't say I dislike the guy, but I definitely don't like him. I very much don't like him, but I don't dislike him to the sense that I think it's funny. But then the problem is that most people aren't watching his shit and finding it funny. They're like, oh, I'm gonna make my personality around him, you know?
Yeah.
So like, and I realize this is a result of a lot of people find him funny. So then people that watch him seriously will see,
Well, I
this
think
as,
this goes to a leadership complex and power. Is
Mhm.
Andrew Tate? I think you mentioned this too. He
Mhm.
got people in the gym. He got people thinking about how do I make money? How do I better myself?
Mhm.
He empowered these people,
Mhm.
and now these people are loyal to him.
And that's exactly the
And
point.
I totally understand that.
Yeah.
The problem is, however, is you got to move beyond that and be like, okay, yep, I've learned these lessons from Andrew Tate. You're right, Andrew Tate was a motivator, but he cannot be your
pure source of value.
source of value. Exactly.
That's exactly the point that Fight Club brings about, because you have this idea of Tyler Durden, right?
Yep.
He allows people to escape their consumerist lifestyles where they're stuck in a constant loop of making money to buy shit they don't need,
Yep.
Things they shouldn't own. What's a duvet? Why the fuck do I know what a duvet is, right? That doesn't support my natural inclination to survive. But then they sacrifice like so they replace one enslavement, which is the enslavement to a consumer hyper-capitalist society, and they enslave themselves to Tyler Durden. Now, instead of becoming free thinkers, they continue their line of being NPCs, of being followers, and they start to follow Tyler Durden. So they replace one slave master with another, and that's essentially what these young, disenfranchised, lonely men are doing with Andrew Tate, right? It's the same concept. You have a very legitimate problem, but you're not really solving the problem. You're just finding someone else to set the problem to. It's like in Exodus, and this is something that I heard in Jordan Peterson's talk. During Exodus, obviously you're pretty familiar with it. The Jewish people, the Hebrew people, were so used to living under the Egyptian pharaoh for so long. Their life was ordered perfectly. They were slaves. So once they have the freedom, they don't understand how to exercise. Yeah,
They didn't want to leave Egypt. Yeah.
Right. So then they said, all right, let's make Moses our Pharaoh. Let's give him all the tyranny, all the power to do whatever they want because we are lost without order. But then, Moses he has so much of workload. All these people bring problems. So Jethro comes along and says, okay, why don't we have a division of labor? Let's have one person be in charge of 10, and then the next person in charge of another 10, and so on and so forth. So people naturally will want to give up one freedom. Or they'll want to give up one enslavement, but then enslave themselves with another. They gravitate towards power. They gravitate towards order, which is why you need a balance of chaos and order. The chaos is the uncertainty of understanding you have to make your own decisions sometimes. You have to reflect upon yourself, and you have to make decisions based on a variety of different considerations as opposed to one absolute authority, which is order. That's why it's a balance of order and chaos. You have to order having some inherent values in your life, because you can't just be totally valueless, but you also have to be able to put your own spin on values and read between the lines and exercise the nuance of certain answers to different questions. So yeah. Anyway, if you didn't have anything to say on that, there's one last thing I want to mention.
It's good. Okay.
No, this is sort of unrelated.
Go ahead.
For sure. Earlier we're talking about you have to study the ugly side of history, right?
Yep.
So, one of the most interesting philosophers and sort of political theorists that I've studied a little bit is named Carl Schmitt. Now, he was also another German philosopher who ended up being a supporter of the Nazi Party, and he had a lot of criticisms of liberal capitalist democracy. And his criticism is that in a liberal capitalist democracy, and this all roots back to this idea of the economic machine. People work so that they don't have to be involved in the political, right? So you focus on your job, you work your 9 to 5, and that's it. You give your responsibility to engage in the political life, engage in democracy. You give it to a representative. We don't exist in a direct democracy in the United States. It's a representative democracy. Yes. You are passing on your responsibility to an elected representative who's probably not going to represent what you actually want, who could be corrupt, who could be with their own ulterior motives. You don't know. But you're passing on your responsibility to that individual. So it's not really a democracy. That is what Carl Schmitt talks about. You sacrifice your your political life so that you can be focused on your economic life. You work so you don't have to be involved in political. Whereas in a more autocratic system, you have to actively engage if you want to become a part of the political process, because you have to, you have to work the power structures. You have to find your way into the little cracks, right? It's a more active lifestyle, and that is one of the issues with current liberal capitalist democracies, is that individuals are what they do for a living. They are what they own, rather than directly being involved in the democracy. If you look at the original United States, everyone was literate because they were coming from a Puritan background. Everyone read Thomas Paine's pamphlets. Everybody read the Revolutionary War text, which Enlightenment thinkers who contributed to this idea of freedom from a monarchy. People were well read. Everyone was actively engaged in democracy. Same with Athenian democracy. You had the polis. People would come together and they'd talk about politics. That's how democracy was meant to be. But then we have an abstraction of that today. We have a representative democracy where people are no longer really involved in what's going on in their country. They're passing on the responsibility to someone else. So essentially, we're really just an oligarchy with the guise of being a democracy.
Yes, I would agree 100% with that. And the best part about it is the people that they don't do anything for politics, but we're gonna fight with each other anyways.
Yeah, we're gonna think
we're gonna yell at each other because of bumper stickers.
Like, that's not the person I supported.
Yeah.
But none of them care about us.
No.
They care about their own power. And if they did care about us, they probably wouldn't get to the position of power, because the power structures, like, all right, he's kind of sold out recently, but one of the individuals I used to be a supporter of was Rand Paul a long time ago.
Oh, yeah.
He used to be like hardcore to his beliefs. He would call out people on the left and the right, regardless. And he was kind of libertarian. So even though I disagreed with a lot of his actual politics, I respected his character. Then he kind of sold out to Trump because he kind of fed off of him. Like, oh, I'll make him happy so that he can help me in my politics. But that's what you need in politics. You need an individual who's able to call out people regardless of partisan alignment and really advocate for the greater good.
I'm wondering when one day, when an independent party will have, maybe not the presidency or, elected, we'll have such a movement that'll actually cause, people argue, will fight to make, alliances, coalitions with that. And yet we have yet to see that.
The only way you can get that to work is if we take away our state election system, because the problem is that if you want to elect a third party, it doesn't matter if the third party gets 10% of the vote. You need 50% of the vote.
Electoral college is broken.
Right. You need it in a specific district. Otherwise, you're going to get no one. So you can have people from spread across the country vote for, let's say, a libertarian. Doesn't matter if they have 10% of the vote. They still won't get one single seat unless it's concentrated in a specific area. And that's why we will always have a two-party system so long as we depend upon the electoral college, so long as we depend upon our current election process. Because, in Europe, it's the percentage. If you have 1%, you might get 3 seats.
Why? Yeah, I mean, Germany's a really good example, which they changed this. They became this way because of World War II. Is that everyone, it's based on your populace that you get a seat.
Right.
And there is no party that has ever gotten 100% of all the seats.
Right. Well,
right?
Since World War II.
And also, as far as I'm aware, there's a max amount of seats. We'll just say arbitrarily that 30 is the max.
Right.
So if a population, let's say they vote 50% of this party, doesn't matter. They're going to get 30 seats, and there's still going to be more seats available.
Right.
So there will always be representation of every party. So what it forces is, at the end of the day, if you want to win an election, you have to make a coalition with someone either in your section or across the aisle. So it actually forces parties to work together as a nation.
That's the only way that you can have a functioning democracy, because otherwise it's no longer a democracy. Right?
Exactly.
I'd say that our version of democracy is like the Roman Republic. It's you have all these senators, but really, how senators were elected. It's who could bribe the most
America
plebeians,
is very much modeled after Rome.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you look at the architecture of the Capitol.
Right.
They wanted it to be Roman. Yeah.
Except we took all the bad parts and not the good parts. Where are our legions? Come on. Where are our eagles?
It'd be cool looking. It would be.
Yeah.
It would kind of have that sort of.
Sure, but not in a cool.
Not as cool.
We're the calves that we're sacrificing before we go invade the country for oil. No, I'm kidding. Jokes.
That's it.
But there are a lot of criticisms of of democracy, even in like sort of ancient Greek times, like Plato. If you read Plato's Republic, Plato forever was his view on democracy was stained since Socrates was sentenced to death in a democratic system. Through the court system, he had an unfair trial, and Plato gives the example. He says and Socrates, I think, believed this to a certain extent as well. Plato gives the example through Plato. So basically, Socrates had no direct works of his own, so all the works about Socrates were through his pupils. So Plato would write from the perspective of Socrates in a lot of his books. And in the Republic, he writes about the idea of, if you're running a ship, who are you going to pick as the captain? Are you going to pick with equal consideration for all the people, or are you going to pick the person with the most experience running a ship?
Most experience running ship.
Right. So Plato says
that's how it is now. I'm running the ship because I have the most experience.
Right. In your job, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So Plato says, then why isn't it the same thing in voting? Why does everyone have the same vote? Shouldn't it be the people that understand politics, who are educated enough to make a well considered decision? So that's one of his criticisms of democracy, right? And Winston Churchill famously says, he has two good quotes. He says, first of all, he says, democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. So even though he's a supporter of democracy, he understands there's issues with it. And he also says the best argument against democracy is a typical conversation, or is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. And he's right. And if we want to have a functioning democracy, you can't have NPCs that will listen to campaign ads and listen to whatever thoughts they're fed by whoever has the easiest means of spouting out useless information. We will only function as a democracy if everybody takes the time and puts in the effort to practice self-reflection, really consider why they think certain ways, why they believe in certain things, and really put effort into voting. Voting is not something that you should just do. There's a reason why it's not super easy to vote. Because if it was like American Idol, like you go on your phone, you text A for Donald Trump or B for Joe Biden, and everyone did it, then it would be kind of like imagine if you had a TV show and it's like, interrupting you now. If you wish to continue watching your TV show, you must first vote for the 2020 election. And people would just be like, okay, they'll pick one, right? So it's kind of difficult to vote because you hope that it'll only be people who actually understand voting. But now people, through activism, for example, people feel empowered by their vote. They say, okay, by voting, I'm contributing to the political process. Meanwhile, they'll vote for the president, but then they'll kind of gloss over it. They'll look at whatever party is their mayor. They'll vote for the mayor that supports their party. They'll vote for the governor that supports their party. They'll vote on props that they saw campaign ads for. The real things that influence policy aren't necessarily going to be the executive branch. It's not necessarily going to be the president. It's going to be little changes like the propositions within your state, the governor you elect, the mayor you elect, the state representatives you elect. That's kind of glossed over. So people think they're engaging in the democratic process because they voted for a president, but they don't really know about anything else they voted for.
Agreed. People do not. We are in, I would argue, in my opinion, the most privileged country in the world.
One of them.
One of them for sure. I'll say one of them for sure, and I would argue that the most privileged. Right?
We have a lot of people that live in poverty, though, which is unique to the United States.
We do.
We have more crime than a lot of countries.
We do, but I would also say that the people who live in poverty here have more opportunity to be way better off than those in other places that are considered poor.
I wouldn't say Europe, though. That are considered poor.
Yeah, so if we're talking about Africa, if you're poor, like or Middle East or Asia, if you're poor, you're probably going to die.
Sure.
But here in America, it is possible to be homeless for decades and you're surviving.
I would just say there's a lot of countries that are more privileged. Like Canada is way more privileged than the United States. Think of all the social services they have.
Okay, so I mean, how are we defining privilege? Because the way I mean it is that we have the opportunity to do so many things, not necessarily like infrastructure, but I mean like we have freedoms to say whatever we want on this, on media.
Sure.
Are there consequences? Yes. That's also because we're using a private platform.
So
technically, that we
free
consent
speech,
to.
for example.
But yes, we have free speech.
Okay, I'll agree on that.
We have free speech.
We have more free speech in
have
most
an
countries.
Election that we can go to and write in all of our answers and ballots and put it up.
thought you were talking about more like economic privilege.
No.
I don't think, because if you look at the crime rates of the United States, our crime rate is way higher than developed countries. Yeah. But political privilege, we have a lot of. Yes, I will agree with that.
Individual. I mean, like individual freedom.
Yeah,
yes, individual freedom, right? So, but with that freedom, we don't really exercise it.
No.
And like that's what you got at with like people don't go and vote. And I have to totally agree with that. And I think, but also I think this kind of goes back to consumerism, sort of, is that we live in an age in which anything is almost instantaneous. I turn on the tap, I immediately get clean water. I go to McDonald's, I'm within 5 minutes of my order or less, I'm gonna get food. I go to a store, I can get anything, right? And so I think people want voting to be that way. Like, I want to vote, and I just want to get it done as quickly as possible, and there we go. Instant gratification, right? Or instant results.
The dopamine is that I voted sticker on your forehead.
Even more dangerous than that is that politics has become a product in the sense of, you said, oh yeah, you see, you know, vote on props and stuff. Well, here's a good example. Within like a mile, I seen the same prop. I think it was like, we'll just say prop for arbitrary number 53 or something, right?
Sure.
1 mile it said, say no to 53. Next half mile, say yes to 53. Next half mile, say no to 53. Next half mile, say yes to 53 on 4 different billboards.
Right.
No context, nothing. Just said, say yes, say no. And, you know, or you'll see the flash ads real quick on TV. I've also heard that Americans spend less than 5 seconds reading a news headline. They don't even read the article, and they base their opinions on the title versus the content.
Right.
And so that's kind of how it is with voting. I just saw vote yes on Prop 53. I didn't think about what I signed. I just saw it on a billboard while I was driving. So it's like, that's what we live in. And when you think about it, that's cowardice, in my opinion, and just absolutely dangerous. That there's no thought put into probably the most important aspect of living in our country.
And that kind of ties into capitalism as well, because whoever has the economic power can buy more billboards, they can buy more campaign ads. And if you're not an informed voter and you just go based on what is given to you rather than searching for your own information, then you're probably going to vote on what you see more on television, what you see more ads for. And naturally, the ads you're going to see more of whoever has more money to be able to promote their point of view. So therefore, those with economic power are inherently going to have more political power as well.
Yes.
So this is a big issue.
It is a big issue. That's probably another podcast.
Oh yeah, you can go hours into discussing.
We can go hours and hours in voting problems and policies. Yeah.
People worship power, and power manifests itself in a variety of ways. Money is a manifestation of power. Social movements, individuals. I say we go back to the core. We go back to how nature intended it to be, and whoever is the most capable should have power. Not whoever was born into the right circumstances. Not whoever is the most silver-tongued. Not whoever can. Okay, I don't know what the last thing I was going to say is.
You hit all of them, man. I don't know.
I think so.
Yeah.
You ever do that where like you're listing like 3 things, but you keep it like you're about to add
keep
another?
Going, yeah.
Like, shit, that was it.
You're like, yeah, I really have nothing else to say.
But yeah, I think those. Is there anything else you want to cover? I think we hit a lot of good stuff.
I need my glasses.
Oh, one more thing. Literally me characters.
I think we're gonna have to come. I think pain deserves its own.
Yeah, we'll definitely get to that.
Ubermensch and pain deserve its own
episodes.
Topic,
yeah.
I think if all of us read on pain, I think we can definitely make that one.
Yeah, I'll definitely get to that soon. It's just to finish this off. I put reflections on death. I was going to talk about Taxi Driver a little bit. We can do a whole.
I've never watched Taxi Driver.
Okay, so then we'll go over it when you watch it. Yeah. Just reflections on death. I think about death a lot because I think that if you don't come to terms about, if you don't have the conversation that you will die well when the situation comes to you, then you won't be prepared. So the reason I talk about this, you want to die well. You don't want to die afraid. You don't want to die a coward, because the people that watch you die, the banner of your death will influence them forever. So let's say you're captured as a POW, for example, right? And you're with some of your comrades in arms, and their last memories of you are you screaming, begging for mercy. That's not gonna have a positive impact on them. They're gonna be demoralized, and they're probably gonna die too. But if your last moments are you standing defiant, accepting your faith, then maybe that last memory will motivate them to go through being a POW and eventually survive themselves. So everything you do echoes in history. It doesn't matter that like your life is not what matters. This is the impact you have on others and the impact you have on the world that matters. So that's kind of what helps me deal with the idea of death, because it scares me. Because I mean, obviously, as a Christian, you have the idea of heaven and hell, but if you're a smart Christian, you also understand that nothing is given to you. You give your belief in religion. You have no fundamental proof. There's no. I mean, even if you believe in heaven and hell, you don't know whether you're going to heaven or hell. You don't know what is on the other side. So you shouldn't be so arrogant to think that you will be granted a reward when you die.
I think people fear less of what's on the other side of the door and more of entering the door, because you there's no way to experience death.
Right.
You cannot experience death. No one has experienced death until they've died. And I think inevitably we fear that because it's unknown, but I would say the second half of that is it's uncontrollable. It's not. It can be on our own time, which is dark, but yes, suicide, which is
Albert Camus says the only question for life is whether or not to commit suicide.
But I do think dying honorably in your life being worth something is most important, and that's what should be focused on. That should be the goal. But who could say it better is Ernst Junger, which I'm going to read this quote I have from his book on Tate. There's only one worldview that is worthy of us, and which has already been discussed as the choice of Achilles. Better a short life full of deeds and glory than a long life without substance. The danger is so great for every individual, every class, every people, that to cherish any illusion whatsoever is deplorable. Time cannot be stopped. There is no possibility for prudent retreat or wise renunciation. Only dreamers believe there is a way out. Optimism is cowardice. We are born into this time and must courageously follow the path to the end as destiny demands. There is no other way. Our duty is to hold onto the lost post, without hope, without rescue, like the Roman soldier whose bones were found in front of a door in Pompeii, who during the eruption of Vesuvius, died at his post because they forgot to relieve him. That is greatness. The honorable end is the one thing that cannot be taken from man.
I love that quote because it's very similar to the one I told you about from Seneca.
Yeah.
Which I'm not going to read out because I don't want to. I'll just paraphrase because it's very similar to that. First of all, it's not about the length of how you've lived. It's about what you did in that short amount of time. It's about accepting your fate. See, Seneca says, we all have duties in life, and our last duty in life is to die. That is a duty you have to take. And like you said, it's not really in our control. You shouldn't be nervous about something that's not in your control because there's no point to be nervous about it because you can't do anything about it, right?
Correct.
So you have to accept your death because death is an inevitability. And, you can't really control when it happens. And there's really no difference between a long and meaningful life versus dying young. Ultimately, it is what it is. You cease to exist. You're dead. But all you can do is while you are alive, make the most of the short time we've been given. And I'm going to go back to some things we discussed about earlier very briefly to sort of finish this off. Philosophy, to Seneca, is what brings us closer to gods. What brings us closer to gods is philosophy, understanding the intricacies of life, understanding, the why of life. And the difference between human philosophers and gods is that gods have an eternity to pursue wisdom, and humans have 50, 60, 70 years. We have a small sliver of time compared to eternity. And in that time, we have to seek to reach the wisdom that gods have eternity to partake in. And similarly, I also want to talk about, really briefly to finish this off, in terms of death, in terms of what we've done in our life, there's and I know you said you haven't seen this the movie Whiplash. He says, now Whiplash is about an aspiring young drummer who wants to become the greatest drummer of all time, and it's essentially his struggle and how hard he works and how he sacrifices everything to be great. And he's at a dinner table with NPCs, in my opinion, and he says to them, and not everyone's going to agree with this, and this isn't a perspective for everyone. Not everyone is meant to be great. And not everyone is meant to sacrifice what it takes to be greatness, because you have to sacrifice some of your humanity to become great. You have to let go of some of the burdens that you're bearing in order to be great. It's like the camel. So like the Jesus is the parable where Jesus talks about he's talking to a rich man, and the rich man says,
"Oh yes,
Father, I follow all the 10 Commandments. I honor my father and my mother. I donate alms to the church. What else can I do to enter the kingdom of heaven?" He says, "Give up all your possessions and walk with me." And the rich man walks away sad, and Jesus turns to his disciples and says, "It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven." Now, a camel, when he's going through a specific entrance in Jerusalem, in order to go through the entrance, he has to unladen his pack. He sacrifices a piece of himself almost, right, to get to the thing. Now, this describes a different phenomenon. So the idea that we have to sacrifice material wealth to enter heaven. But I think this also applies to sacrificing a piece of yourself for greatness, which has to do with life and death and what is immortality, right? You have to sacrifice a piece of yourself if you want to be great. And this young aspiring drummer, played by Miles Teller, it's a great movie, Whiplash, go see it. He says, "I rather die at 35, broke and homeless, but be talked about at a dinner table for the next 100 years, than die at 90, rich and surrounded by friends."
Actually, now that you say that, I've seen that clip.
Good.
I have seen that clip. Yeah.
But that's the price of greatness. And what life is more meaningful in terms of impacting history, in terms of changing the lives of people, right? Impacting people. It is not the longer life, but the life that goes beyond what is expected of them. And in the comment, I saw a meme of this. I don't want to call it a meme, but a picture of this scene. And people in the comments were hating on it, like, "Oh, I'd rather die at 90, blah blah blah. I'd rather be comfortable." And that really reflects what our society is today. Is a
Yes.
society of people who want comfort, who want to live, in terms of constantly desiring pleasure.
Well, I would say to those people is that you cannot control when death comes for you.
Mm-hmm.
Death always reaps its harvest. You can't even necessarily control the way you die, but you can control how you're perceived by people post your fact.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to leave something memorable for people. And anybody who thinks that they have any control whatsoever of how do I explain this? If you think you have any control, if you have the illusion of control that you can stop death, you're absolutely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen death happen like that. I've known people who've seen death happen like that. It happens all the time. If you think you're safe because you're in a Western country and you think, "Oh well, I prefer to live till I'm 90 and be comfortable," well, that's what you want. That's not necessarily how it will go.
It's what nature wants.
Because it's not what nature wants necessarily. Because you could be driving down the street all fine, and someone's tire comes flying, or a semi truck tire, comes off and it bounces down the road and it comes right through your windshield. That can happen. Or someone can make a mistake, hit their brakes, you hit your brakes too late, then you're slamming into them and now you're dead. Motor vehicle accidents are very common. That's just to name a few. You could get bit by a poisonous spider, a poisonous snake.
Venomous.
There's so many. Venomous. There's so many factors that could happen to you. You have to learn to accept the uncontrollable.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, death is inevitable. And I don't know if you've heard me talk about the myth of Sisyphus before.
No.
So, and all right, this will be. I know I keep going off.
Yeah,
on
we keep
tangents.
going.
This will be the final thing, I promise. It's just because like you say one thing that makes you think of other.
Yeah, it's like a dynamic.
Yeah, but just to finish this off, so the myth of Sisyphus. This is an analogy that Albert Camus makes to a life that he deems as meaningless, and humans without living a life without meaning need to find their own meaning. That's like existentialism and absurdism, and he talks about the Greek myth, which describes the I believe a Greek king named Sisyphus, and he was a very cunning man, very very sneaky. And when Hades comes to take him to the underworld, he comes with his chains, prepared to chain him up and bring him across the river Styx into the underworld. And he says, "All right, you ready to come with me, Sisyphus? I'm going to chain you, and then we'll go down." And Sisyphus says, "How do you know those chains work? Are you really sure? How do you know those specific chains work? I think you should test them out on yourself first, just to make sure they'll work on me." So Hades says, "All right," chains himself. "See, I can't get out. They work." And Sisyphus says, "Okay, good." Tosses him into a closet. Goes about his day. Now, the issue is once death is tied up, Hades, hidden in a closet, nobody dies. So for the next 3 days, people are getting stabbed in battle and coming back to life. People are being run over by carts and coming back to life. And the gods recognize this and they say, "Okay, something's going on." They send their guys out. They find out what's happened. And Sisyphus is in big trouble for what he has done. Because he has cheated death, he is subjected to an eternity of pushing a boulder up a hill only for it to come back down once he reaches the top. Now, Albert Camus says, this is our life. It's meaningless. You were born to die. That's it. You're given just a fraction of experience only for it to be taken away at any instant, right? Like you said. But he says, this isn't something that should make us despair, but rather something that we should find hope and inspiration for. Because although Sisyphus knows the boulder will fall back down as soon as he reaches the top, essentially making the efforts of his labor pointless, right? He's going to be constantly doing this for eternity. We must think of Sisyphus as happy as he pushes the boulder up the hill. He has no control over anything he does. So the only form of rebellion, the greatest form of rebellion that he has, is to show all the people that subject him with this hardship, with this punishment, which is life. The hardship and punishment that is life. The greatest form of rebellion is to be happy nonetheless, is to smile in the face of death, smile in the face of adversity, and take it. Push your boulder up the hill. And that is our lives through Camus. Meaningless, no point, we're going to die one day. We could die at any moment, but we have to bear with it, and we have to move forward. And I always like to mention that specific analogy from Camus because I think it's a really beautiful analogy and just came to mind. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think I got it all.
Yeah, this is the longest podcast. This is almost 2 hours.
I mean, yeah.
This is the Stiegel
Radler.
The Stiegel Radler got us thinking. Well, I guess I'll conclude with the famous words that we have within the podcast, and that is, this is the warrior philosopher building the foundations of the warrior philosophy. We'll see you next time.
I have always loved